Mighty Metal Warriors. It's a pretty rare game, and I finally get to play it, but the more interesting thing about this is how I'm playing it.
This is legal. Maybe. Video game emulators. That's what we're here for. A side of gaming that some adore while others scream, "This isn't how games are meant to be played."
Yeah, officer, he's playing Monopoly for the NES on PS3. Yeah, go cap his ass.
I used to think like these people once upon a time. The purist would be the appropriate term to describe them. When I started collecting games, they had to be on the original console with the original controller on a CRT display. I've come to realize over the years that I just wanted to play these games, so how I played them didn't matter as long as I got to play them. Not to say I disagree with my previous mindset, no. On the contrary, I completely understand why people would want to play old games this way. Each one of these old consoles has such a unique charm to them. And playing with the original controller these games were designed for just feels right. In a way, it takes you back to much simpler days when the only thing you really had to worry about was video games and if your BMX had those things on the tires or not. However, the biggest issue with this mindset is that not everyone can afford the console and these games. You ever see a Neo Geo for $50? Yeah, no. As a result, people turn to emulation in order to play old games that they either grew up with or have never played before. Emulators are an easy way for people to play old games. Now, the emulators themselves aren't illegal, but how would one go about getting games to use said emulator?
Crime.
Getting ROMs for these emulators is such a giant mess, it could easily warrant a video of its own. I'd honestly much rather focus on how modern emulators came to be. Emulators began appearing at the start of the 90s, when personal computers were more widely available for the average consumer. People began to utilize these computers to create emulators of the NES, with the earliest being the Family Computer emulator, released on December 12, 1990. These early emulators weren't great, and the few games they could run didn't look good and didn't have sound. It's obvious that this was a first attempt at a software emulator. Of course, over time things began to improve, games started running more smoothly, and sound eventually became a thing, but it was still terrible. During this period of time, emulators were obscure to the average consumer, even those with PCs. Big gaming companies knew about these emulators, but chose to leave them be as they believed they would never really pose a threat.
Boy, would that come back to bite them in the ass.
During the height of the PS1's popularity, two emulators were developed for the console, the Kinectix Virtual Game Station and Bleem. These two PS1 emulators were commercial products that you could actually buy in stores, and they could run a fair amount of games. The only catch is that you had to use retail discs. The Virtual Game Station was released first on Macintosh computers, with a Windows port following soon after, and became popular with consumers very quickly. It cost less than half of an actual PlayStation, so you'd be an idiot not to buy it. Bleem was the other PS1 emulator out at the time, and arguably the better one. This emulator was similar to the Virtual Game Station. You couldn't run downloaded ISOs, you had to use the retail discs. But Bleem was unique for one reason. It enhanced PS1 games. Bleem was capable of running games in a higher resolution compared to the original hardware, and yeah, looks leagues better than the PS1.
Obviously, Sony took these two emulators to court, first the Virtual Game Station and then Bleem, and both times went about this well. Emulators had a bit of a rough start, but thanks to the Virtual Game Station and Bleem, we have emulators for all kinds of different systems, so why don't we take a look at a few?
PC is where emulation started, and it's arguably at its best here. The first emulator we're taking a look at is an NES emulator called FCE-UX. I played 3 games here, Super Mario Bros., Mega Man 3, and Super Mario Bros. 3 Mix. Why those 3? Well, I'm familiar with how Mario 1 and Mega Man 3 are supposed to look and sound, and playing a ROM hack like 3 Mix means that the emulator has good compatibility, and yeah, these games look and sound exactly how they should. You can even use a filter to get that blurry, jaded look the original hardware always had. Next up is BSNES, and this is by far the best SNES emulator that you can get. BSNES plays these games perfectly. The music is spot on, the games look fantastic, there's dozens of different visual options, including widescreen. There's also HD Mode 7, it smooths the image out and makes everything a lot less eye-straining. N64 emulation is still far behind other Nintendo emulators, but what we have is still quite good. Project 64 is what I use, and it's compatible with a wide variety of games like the Ocarina of Time Master Quest, Smash Remix, which is something I've already taken a look at, and even the recently leaked Dinosaur Planet ROM. Kinda. Project 64 can do so much more though. Take a look at this HD texture pack from Majora's Mask by Nerl. This is running in an N64 emulator, and it looks so good. arguably one of the most popular emulators in the world, the Dolphin Emulator, where you can play your favorite GameCube and Wii games provided that your PC is good enough and you're not running the games on a... To be fair, the games didn't run too bad on Mac. Aside from some stuttering, the games were fully playable. I got Luigi's Other Mansion and Super Mario Sunburn playing, two mods I wouldn't mind dedicating an entire video on, and Mario Kart Double Dash. I was even able to play with the original controller thanks to this third-party GameCube adapter. I didn't test any Wii games because I didn't have any archival copies from my library. However, I have seen those games run just as well, and you can even sync up a Wiimote.
Emulation on PC is great. It has so many different features, like being able to filter the games to look like it's running on a CRT, running them in widescreen at 60 FPS, having mods and ROM hacks to make the games even better. But there's some consoles out there that I feel shouldn't be emulated on PC. Specifically the DS.
A lot of original DS games relied on the touchscreen to be played, like Metroid Prime Hunters or Elite Beat Agents. There's a lot of exceptions, but DS games, I feel, are most comfortable when played on the original hardware or the 3DS. The 3DS is a different story. This little guy doesn't have as many touchscreen-heavy games because Nintendo realized that people like to use these, instead of this, to play some games. So running games through Citra isn't that big of a pain since the touchscreen was relegated to item management and a map screen, which is something that it's really natural for.
Running emulators for handhelds isn't really my favorite thing to do because that defeats the whole purpose of a handheld, but speaking of the 3DS and consoles in general, what if you wanted to run an emulator on one of these?
Yes, you can run emulators on a lot of your favorite consoles like the 3DS, Switch, Wii, Wii U, GameCube, and PS3. Some legit, the rest are not. I suppose we should start with more legit stuff this go around. The Switch has official NES and SNES emulators that can run a variety of different games provided that you have Switch Online. See, on one hand, I like this. On the other hand, this is stupid fucking shit. These games are only here to boost the value of Switch Online. The emulation is pretty good, but it's far behind what you can get on PC. There's very little options for adjusting visuals, no button remapping, your choice of games are limited by what Nintendo gives you, also I'm kind of sick of NES and SNES stuff. Nintendo really likes to milk these two consoles, even though a lot of their current audience grew up with N64 and GameCube. It would make a lot more sense to re-release games for those consoles instead of just dumping Mario 1 on us for the upteenth time.
There is no bigger you to Nintendo than running an unofficial emulator on their own goddamn hardware.
The Wii is notorious for being piss easy to hack, which means that it's possible to run some emulators on the system. Obviously there's the Virtual Console, rest in peace, but it's nothing compared to the mileage you can get out of some of these homebrew apps. Of course there's some NES, SNES, and Game Boy emulators, but I would like to draw your attention to this. Nintendo, a way to play any GameCube game you want on the Wii.
I'm pretty sure this thing was already backwards compatible with GameCube games.
Well, yes, it was, but Nintendo brings a lot to the table, like widescreen progressive scan mode, BBA emulation, the ability to play PAL and Japanese games, modded games run on here as well, and is the only way I can play Super Smash Bros. Melee on a Wii U with a PS3 controller. Yeah, it's also possible to hack the virtual Wii on the Wii U to run Nintendo, and it works just as well as it does on the Wii, though you do lose GameCube controller, retail disc, and accessory support. Now, in terms of portable emulation, the 3DS is currently my steed of choice.
Remember when Nintendo said that the original model of the 3DS couldn't handle Super Nintendo games?
That's what the cool kids call bullshit. To be fair, games like Star Fox 2 don't run that great, so I kinda get it. Despite this, the 3DS can run a wide variety of emulators, ranging from the NES to the DS. NES and SNES games honestly look better than I thought they would. GBA games being playable here is nice because that console houses some of my favorite games of all time, like Metroid Zero Mission, Pokemon Fire Red, and Super Mario Bros. 3. Having the ability to play downloaded DS games on the hardware it was meant to be on, makes me so happy. You can also buy select Game Boy games off Nintendo's eShop, and they run just as well, but no DS or GBA games, which is kinda lame.
Speaking of Game Boy Advance games, what if you weren't like me and you wanted to actually play your Game Boy games on the TV? Well, have I got a plastic tumor for you.
Introducing the Game Boy Player, the best way to play your favorite Game Boy games on the TV. This beautiful piece of hardware can play any official Game Boy cart in the world, assuming you have the disc that came with it. Hardware itself, common as dirt. Game Boy Player disc? Yeah, what the f***? Thankfully, there is an alternative. The Game Boy Interface, or GBI, is great for those of us without money. Like me. Utilizing a hacked Wind Waker save file, you can run any Game Boy game in the world with your Game Boy Player without the startup disc. The games look and play so well, dude. I don't think the UI's presentation is as good, but that's a worthy sacrifice in my opinion.
And that's all the time I have. I know I missed a bunch of other emulators like MAME, RetroArch, MGBA, there's a PS3 emulator out there. Maybe someday we could return to this topic and take a look at emulators outside of Nintendo consoles. The emulation community is just a lot of fun to be a part of. Having the ability to play any video game ever made in any resolution with any controller is amazing, and it's maybe probably not illegal.
Boys! It's a f***ing Wii Jenga!
No!